I thought I'd just give a little context as to why we're doing this in the first place. So we did a podcast together, and that was at a time where I was actually in like one of the worst mast cell flares I've ever been in my life. And I learned so much on that podcast. Like it was like light bulb, light bulb, light bulb the whole time. And yeah, so I started doing your program. I guess it's been like 2 months now. And like even my husband said today, he was like, because I've done, and we all know this, like a million things, like people that deal with these chronic long-standing issues typically do, and you sign up for a million programs, and typically things work for a bit and then kind of regress. And yeah, he was even like, I can't get over how much this has improved your life. And yeah, I've been honest about this. I don't receive any kickbacks. I paid full price for your program, and I just wanted to shout it from the rooftops because I think, like, especially with mast cell activation syndrome, we're always approaching it from like the antihistamine supports and supplements and toxin exposure and avoidance and all of that. And I've never approached it from this lens of how I was breathing, how I have moved my whole life, how my body has always been overcompensating. I didn't even really know until like last year that I even really was dealing with any of these issues when I, was kind of diagnosed by a provider. And so I kind of wanted to like ignore all of that too when I was learning about it. I didn't even want to go down that rabbit hole because it's like, this can't be cured, it's something that you're, kind of born with, and sometimes can progress. And so I was like, that's too scary for me. But meeting you and having that conversation, I just so appreciate how you make all of this so not scary and so hopeful. I think when you look at a lot of like EDS information online or support groups and that kind of thing, it can be, I don't want to use the word like victim mindset, but it can be very hopeless. And, I can't do anything and I can't exercise. And you completely have shifted that thinking. And so I really wanted to start by talking about that and how you, like, who are you? What do you do? And how have you developed this program to really empower people through movement and teach them that, like, you can build strength and you can exercise?
My first question for you is going to be, what's been your biggest takeaway? And the fact that you said hope without me even prompting that.
Yeah.
That is the whole goal, purpose of our program is hope, understanding your body better so that you can take what you're learning and do it on your own. And what you learn in our program isn't just like a quick fix. And I think that's what you were describing at first of like, well, we try all these programs and they never work, or they work for a little bit and then they stop. That's not what this is. This is a mindset shift. This is a complete different outlook on your body, and that stays with you forever, no matter what. And then the last one is strength and building true, real strength, which is necessary for all women, but especially women dealing with this condition, because we are at the highest risk of osteoporosis.
Yeah.
And that is something we do have control over. And we don't have control over a lot of things in our health. And so for the things that we do, we have to prioritize them. But as far as the hope piece, I agree with you. There's a huge, and I'm not afraid to say it anymore, there is a huge victim mindset when it comes to living with this condition. And I want everybody to know that HEDS, I'm only talking about HEDS right now, is not a progressive disorder. What that means is it does not just naturally get worse on its own. It can feel like it's getting worse and your symptoms can progress, but that is from a domino effect of multiple different factors, not from the actual inherent nature of the disorder. And that gets misconstrued a lot, and that gets people angry sometimes too. That is not saying that because you're feeling worse, that that's not real and that's not valid, or that that's your fault. That is not what it's saying. But what it is saying, and this should be a good thing, is, oh, maybe I can change some things and maybe I can improve my life. It could, like, two things get to be true at the same time. But as far as the hope around this condition and making it less scary, the reason I needed to do that is because I'm a patient myself and I was seeing it day in and day out. When I would go to physical therapy, so a little bit of background on my story, I knew about this condition, which is very rare, from a long, long time ago when I was little. I had an amazing amazing care team as a kid. I had a great physical therapist, a great occupational therapist, a great chiropractor, a great PCP, and I never thought about any of this stuff ever.
Yeah.
Then I went to college and I didn't have that support system anymore. And this was the first time I went to the campus wellness center, never knew what medical gaslighting was, never even, it wasn't a part of my vocabulary or world. And that's when I experienced pain really for the first time and a lot of medical gaslighting and a lot of fear mongering. The first physical therapist I went to in college told me I should never lift above my head again, never lift weights above my head again, or my shoulders will be destroyed to the point where I will not be able to use my arms. So I was naive. I didn't know any better. And I kind of took that to heart and I stopped exercising for a
Yeah.
year. And that was when I felt the worst in my entire life. And luckily, I was a pre-med major. I was an athlete prior, so I knew a little bit, but definitely not what I know now. And I realized something wasn't right about a year into college, and so I did start exercising again. I stopped listening to that advice, and then I started realizing, oh, I'm feeling a little bit better. Things are improving. Then fast forward, I went to Chiro school and kind of similar but different situation. I actually ended up becoming the best shape of my life in Chiro school. But then unfortunately, I had a neck adjustment that completely blew everything up for me. And that became one of my biggest triggers. And that's something that I do want people to know is that there are now known triggers that can make
Yeah.
you go from asymptomatic to
Yes.
symptomatic. One of them is trauma, and in this case, that's what this was. That can be emotional trauma too. It doesn't have to just be physical trauma. The second is infections like COVID, Epstein-Barr virus. And then the third is perimenopause, menopause, and postpartum. And so if you know you're hypermobile, but you don't have any symptoms, great, enjoy that. We don't need to worry. But if you have any of those three triggers, that means that you might just want to get a little bit extra support during that time period so that hopefully we can mitigate going into a full-blown flare after one of those triggers are present. And there's a lot we can do to make that happen. And so that is kind of how I started this program, if you will. I was working in a traditional chiro setting, and that really opened my eyes to the need for more virtual and more one-on-one support, especially for people with complex illnesses, because coming in to see your practitioner once a week for 5 to 10 minutes is not going to cut it. It's not going to cut it. And you just can't get enough done there. And when you're living with this condition, weird things happen all the time. Like you need to have access to support throughout your week. That to me is the most important piece, is being able to say like, this is going on, what can I do about it in the moment, and working through it and learning as you're doing and working through those fears, because a lot of fears come up when these symptoms are really, really scary.
Yeah. Extremely.
Yep. And so that's kind of the long answer, short answer to how I created this program.
Well, and I love how high touch your program is, and I think nervous system regulation is such a huge thing, especially in the chronic illness world, mast cell activation syndrome world, and all of that. And, I've done so many programs where it's just like virtual and there's no interaction and your program is so very high touch and it is, constant check-ins like, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. And there is that like in the moment corrections and advice. And I think that's been one of the biggest things, like to know you're held, but also like kind of preventing, like you said, that domino effect. Because when I was, signed up for this program, I was in another like exercise intolerance period where every time and this has been happening to me for years, where I would get into a good groove and then, some stressor would come along and it would just boom, boom, boom. And then before I know it, I'm in so much pain and just can't exercise at all. And I think that having those tools that you've been able to provide has like helped me be able to get out of I'm like, oh, the neck is starting. And it's like, okay, here's what to do and how to prevent this domino. And I think like something I really want to touch on, like you said, that neck adjustment kind of sent you down that spiral, is being in chronic pain. I was constantly seeking body work.
Yes.
And I didn't realize how much the body work that I was doing was keeping me in a perpetual flare.
Yep.
And that is one of the biggest things that like I've kind of removed going like, oh my God, these emergency like adjustments or massages or, more neck work. Because now it's like, okay, I have these tools. I don't need to do that. And I've removing that, I've been able to see from like kind of a bird's eye, like how much that was keeping me stuck in a cycle.
Yeah, I see this far too often, and it's multiple factors. There is a piece of it that is getting manual therapy when you are super loosey goosey, when you have loose joints, just makes things looser. We know manual therapy has a short term effect on our range of motion and it increases it, it doesn't decrease it. And most of us don't need that short term increase in range of motion. Now, is that the most dangerous thing in the world? No. But if we're getting it 3 times a week or every single time we have a symptom, it stacks up. And that's one part of it. The second part is the contextual factors around manual therapy. And when I'm saying manual therapy, I am talking about all of it. I'm
Yeah.
talking about acupuncture. I am talking about massage. I'm talking about craniosacral. I'm talking about fascial counterstrain. I'm talking about adjustments. And I'm saying this all from a chiropractic lens. So I'm very, very
Yeah.
familiar with manual therapy and I'm not bashing it. There's a
Yeah.
time and a place for it, but that time and a place is usually not as much as what I'm seeing people get. But I really want to talk about the contextual factors around manual therapy because when you are told this is out of alignment, this is what is causing your pain, this is what is causing your symptoms, I, the provider, am the one that is going to fix it with my hands, that leaves you feeling extremely dependent on that person and extremely fearful of your own body. Do you know how scary it is to feel like you don't have any control of your alignment? You don't have any control of your bones, which by the way is not true at all, but we can get into that in a second. But those contextual factors I see causing more harm than anything else. And that transitions into a narrative of every time I feel that tweak in my neck, that means my bone is moving and that could hit my spinal cord and that can cause some really big, bad, and scary things. I must go to a chiropractor right now when we need to put rules around that. Maybe that's what's happening. Or maybe it's just your body's trying to send you a signal because it's protecting you from something and we need to go give our nervous system some love and some safety instead. We need to know what our pain signals are trying to tell us, and that's the number one thing I hope people learn in my program is understanding what is your body trying to tell you and how do
Yeah.
we give it that. And the answer is usually not external, it's usually internal, which is
Yeah.
hard for us.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the safety piece is a huge factor when it comes to, any of these like chronic illnesses. And I do think you do such a good job at helping people restore that safety within themselves. Like, hey, I'm in control of this. I can do something to support myself right now. Can you talk about like you said that piece of like your body is trying to protect you, like when you do get like an adhesion here or like like a trigger point or those types of things, like what does that mean and why is that happening more so in like a hypermobile body, and what signal is that sending to the system?
Yeah, so believe it or not, those trigger points that you feel, I know you can feel them with your hands, but that is still stemming from your nervous system. It is not actually your tissue creating that. And we have a lot of like ultrasound studies showing this. This is a fact, not an opinion. And so whenever I hear, oh, I have a trigger point, oh, I have a lot of tension in an area, the first thing I'm always going to look at is our nervous system surrounding that area because we know that those things happen when an area doesn't feel safe. This happens a lot more in a hypermobile body because there are some real structural things that make it a little unsafe for our body. And so when we have a connective tissue disorder, our ligaments are made of connective tissue. Normal people's ligaments are a normal rubber band. They bounce back. They create stability for you. When you have ligament laxity, it's an overstretched rubber band. There's nothing you can do about that. That goes in the that's out of my control bucket. The only thing changing that is a scalpel, and that is very rarely what we need. Luckily, we do have control over our muscles and our nervous system. And so our body says, hey, she doesn't have stability. I need to help her out. I need to keep her alive because that's all our body cares about. It does not care about anything else, does not care about how you feel. I'm going to get really tight to create that stability for her But if those muscles then don't have the capacity, they don't have the strength, they don't have the capability to withstand what you're asking for them, they fatigue. That becomes a cycle of more instability and less safety, and now your nervous system doesn't trust your body again, and it just happens over and over again. And so instead of demonizing that tightness, and instead of just going in and releasing it over and over and over again and getting a couple of days, if you're lucky, of relief for it to come back again, maybe even stronger, why don't we look at what areas are tightening up and what areas surrounding that are we not able to control? Learn to control those areas, create safety in the tighter areas before we release them. There's a time and a place to release them, but we need to have those other measures in place first.
Can you kind of talk about how, like, why you maybe don't want to go in and there, sorry, my computer's trying to like dig in and go after that spot?
Yeah, because so let's use our neck for an example. Usually the areas that you're going to get trigger points in are going to be either in your SCM muscle, your scalenes, or your upper traps. If you are dealing with any sort of instability in your neck, any sort of instability in your shoulder, or any instability in your jaw, those areas are best friends. They're all extremely interconnected. That is going to cause some of those areas to get tighter. Now, if we go in and we go and take away that tightness, that might be the only thing providing stability for us. And if it's in our neck specifically, that can create too much loosey-goosiness, and that can create multiple problems because there's a lot of structures in our neck. That's where we can see brain fog come into play. That's where we can see dizziness come into play. And then if it's in our jaw, believe it or not, we can even get some ringing in our ears. We can get TMJD issues. And then in our shoulders, that can impact our ability to lift overhead, lift our kids, do things confidently with our arms, which is really, really important. And so we don't want to just go and make already loose structures looser. We want to figure out how can we create control, stability first, and then work on those muscles. There's a time and a place, but it's definitely not the first thing that we want to do.
Yeah, that makes me think, like, can we get into, because a lot of the questions were surrounded by, I think I might be hypermobile. How do I get a diagnosis, or how do I know what are some common signs and symptoms? Because I think, like, like when I sat down with that provider, it was like a 2 hour intake, and it was like going back through like all, like from birth, like until, what I was like 42 at that time or whatever. What are those big signs? Because I'm sure that if you are dealing with these things, there were signs for a very long time.
Yeah. So the number one thing I always get pushback on is like, I can't be hypermobile. I'm so tight. I'm
Yeah.
not flexible. That is what I just described. Feeling tighter is usually a sign to me that you might be hypermobile. So if I'm hearing, usually the biggest red flag in this realm is like if you have a multitude of systems that
Yeah.
are off and you have a bunch of symptoms that don't seem to make sense to anybody, that is my sign. All right, let's look deeper. Now, as far as the hypermobility piece in itself, I think that gets very confusing, especially on the internet. And so, just to summarize it, hypermobility in itself just means you have a joint that goes past its desired statistical end range. Every joint in your body has a statistical number that it's supposed to go to. If it goes past that, it's considered a hypermobile joint. That in itself is not a problem. If you have 5 or more of those joints in your body that go past that end range, that means that you have what we call generalized joint hypermobility, which again, not necessarily a problem.
Right.
But if you have that plus chronic pain, plus some systemic stuff going on, all right, let's look deeper. Again, if you have that and you're asymptomatic and you have one of those triggers that we talked about prior, that's also another reason to get some more support. So those are the 2 areas we should get support. But what I do see a little too often on the internet is like, if you're hypermobile, you need to worry about everything. And like, not
Yeah.
necessarily, like, go look at some of the gymnasts at the Olympic elite
Yeah.
level. Like, this is not, just because you're hypermobile does not mean you have a connective tissue disorder. They are not the same thing.
Right.
Now, as far as the HEDS world, all of the stuff I'm about to say is changing. December 2nd is when the diagnostic criteria is being updated. So take all of this with a grain of salt. But as of right now, the diagnostic criteria, you find out if you have 5 or more joints that are hypermobile. And if yes, then you move on to this random list of 12 symptoms. And if you have 5 of those, plus chronic pain, plus joint instability, you move on to blood work to figure out and make sure we rule out any other forms of connective tissue disorders or autoimmune disorders that mimic this condition. And that is, as of right now, how you get diagnosed with this condition. This is an opinion, not a fact. Opinion wise, don't always think we need a diagnosis for this to work through solutions. There is a time and place, especially if there's red flags that I think that we might be dealing with another type of connective tissue disorder that might be more dangerous. But if we are classic HEDS, HSD symptom profile, and we don't need an answer to work through solutions, it may not be worth your time, especially knowing it's going to change soon. So that's just my little caveat there. But some of the most common symptom groupings that we hear is chronic pain, joints that are unstable, or joints that sublux or dislocate. And you do not need to have that one to have this disorder. That's another common myth. Dizziness or a high heart rate or a racing heart, or cardio feels really, really hard. Brain fog and fatigue. That's going to be more in the dysautonomia bucket. Anything in the mast cell family, whether that's IBS-like symptoms, food sensitivities, pain with eating, itchiness, skin stuff, flushing of your face, anything in that realm. Those are going to be our most common buckets, and that's what they call the terrible triad. Yeah, and it is
Lovely.
yeah, it's lovely. It is the most common symptom profile that we see. Now, we also know being neurodivergent is very, very common in this population, and for all of this stuff, we don't know why. And that's another big part of my program, is trying to let go of that controlling need of wanting to know why so bad, because you might never know. And if that's stopping you from doing the what, that's a problem. So yeah, we could talk a little bit about that too. But yeah, neurodivergent.
Let's put that, because I want to talk about that, because I want to talk about root cause and get into that a little bit too. So let's remember that.
Yes. And then the last symptom group I want to talk about, because this is becoming more and more common in what I'm seeing and what I'm seeing like happening, endo, adeno, fibroids, hormonal stuff, things in that realm is becoming more and more prominent, as well as pelvic congestion syndrome. And I'm getting a lot of questions on pelvic congestion syndrome right now. The evidence is very, very clear that that should be a generalized screening for this population, but unfortunately that is not accessible right now. And so the best thing that we can do is just continue to advocate for that. But if it is not accessible, I would not spend $10,000 on that testing. It is not worth that. But if we can advocate more for that, and especially medical doctors, hopefully maybe insurance can start chipping away at that. That's a conversation for a different day, but that is something that I would love to see more. That is one of the areas where I do think we need more awareness around and advocating around right now, more than anywhere else. It's just not accessible to actually get that testing yet in most places, so just be aware of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So why is like mast cell activation syndrome, dysautonomia, endo, why are these all connected?
Yeah, so like a lot of this is hypothesis as of right now. So the Norris Lab just came out with a paper. So we used to think that this disorder was a primary connective tissue disorder. What that means is that connective tissue, which lines everything in your body, has a collagen defect, a genetic defect, and that makes your system act differently. We know mast cells live in our connective tissue, and so that's what the original hypothesis was that the connective tissue issues made our mast cells angry. Now we're starting to think it might be the opposite. And so what they're hypothesizing, and this is something that people who have been working in this realm for a while have been really noticing and really trying to say, like, I think we got it wrong, and it's finally starting to catch up. But what they're hypothesizing is there is 3 subgroups of this condition. One of them is that primary connective tissue disorder. The second, which is what I see more commonly, is actually it's a secondary connective tissue disorder, and the primary is the mast cell or the immune system. And so, like I said, your mast cells live in your connective tissue, and your mast cells produce a bunch of chemicals. They don't just produce histamine. They produce something called elastase, And elastase goes in, and guess what? It makes your connective tissue more lax. It makes your ligaments more lax. And so that is a big hypothesis right now of, especially with the long COVID presentation.
Yes.
Okay, I had long COVID, I had an infection. That is when my symptoms started. My mast cells were really the start of this. Maybe I wasn't bendy as a kid, and now I'm starting to feel unstable, and now I'm starting to feel loosey goosey. So that is one of the biggest hypotheses that hopefully we will get answers on in December. So that's kind of the mast cell piece. Now the dysautonomia piece is usually secondary. So dysautonomia is a big umbrella term for your autonomic nervous system, which controls all the things you don't think about. And there's 30 different types. The most common is POTS, orthostatic hypotension is second. That is a nervous system disorder. When your mast cells are angry, when you don't trust your body, when your body can't trust itself, what's the first thing that's going to respond? Your nervous system. And when our nervous system is consistently getting wrong inputs over and over again and never creating those neural pathways of safety and resilience and strength, something usually is going to go off. And then unfortunately, usually we either are getting medically gaslit, told it's anxiety, or we're self-gaslighting ourselves, or we're just ignoring it, and that does not create more safety, and then it can turn into a full-blown
Yeah.
POTS syndrome, so on and so forth. And there are certain things that we know make POTS worse that come along with this, which one is deconditioning. Now, deconditioning does not cause POTS, but deconditioning does make POTS worse. And so if you have an infection, or now you're in a full-blown mast cell flare, and you can't exercise, or you feel you can't exercise, or you were told not to exercise, now we're becoming deconditioned, and it's just
Yeah.
this endless loop that we got to break.
And it's so frustrating. It's so incredibly frustrating to be stuck in that loop. I mean, that's the loop that I was in when I, came to see you. And something, talking about this dysautonomia, because everything has just been for myself so mass self focused, because that is kind of like a primary for me. And I see as I get worse and worse flares, then it's like the instability has become worse and worse. And in this flare, it was like the constant adrenaline dumping, inability to control my temperature. Like I would just get absolutely freezing. You'll hear on the internet, oh, that's your thyroid. Well, it wasn't. And, also like my legs would turn blue, and, you're like, yeah, that's dysautonomia, and I was never approaching things from this lens of being able to support myself when I, get those symptoms. Can you describe some of the things that you help clients do that are having those issues? Because I think the adrenaline dumps for me all day, every day were really just so destabilizing. And like every stress I encountered, even if it was just like, driving, that it was ruining my life, and that has completely gone away for the most part for me. And so can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I don't think that people identify it in themselves enough, and how you help clients with that.
Yeah, and that just starts with understanding your body and your body's warning signs. But this part is the most frustrating part to me, because this dysautonomia really is a condition we can help so much with as musculoskeletal clinicians, and with lifestyle changes. Mast cell, yes, we can, but honestly, not always. And there needs to sometimes be medical intervention for mast cell. Don't get me wrong, sometimes we need medications for POTS. I'm not saying that we don't,
Yeah.
but I would say 85% of the time, it doesn't require that. And like, there's so many people struggling with this, and they are being told it's just anxiety and they can't do
Yeah.
anything about it. And that makes the cycle worse. I know I'm not answering your question, but I just needed to get that
No,
off my
it's so
chest.
important to say too, because it's like, oh,
Yeah.
here's an SSRI, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
is that going to help this person?
Right, right. And so how we approach this, number one, is we take a full detailed history, and we ask the very specific questions that we know relate to dysautonomia. So the ones that you just described, adrenaline dumps, that feeling of like if you're waking up in the middle of the night, like yep. And if you're like that shakiness feeling, that
You
like,
can feel it completely
yeah, it's
go
like
through
the
your body.
staticky,
Yeah.
like it feels like there's static all over you is the best way I can describe it. Blood pooling, which blood pooling does not always have to be visual. You might not always see it, but if you do, it looks like your feet are turning reddish, purplish. You can also get it in your hands. That is one of the most common things that people overlook and will blame the thyroid for, or will blame just circulation issues in general, which it might actually be more simple than that. It might not be a vein issue. It might genuinely just be our nervous system not pumping the blood enough through our system. The type of dizziness. If you are experiencing dizziness where the room spins, that's more of a vertigo dizziness.
Yeah.
If you are experiencing a dizziness where it's like you feel hungover, you feel drunk, but you didn't drink, or you feel like there's a staticky TV in your head, that rings bells for dysautonomia to me. High heart rate, heart palpitations with no structural issues. I do think it's important, if you are diagnosed with this condition, rule out anything big, bad, and scary in your heart. Get an echocardiogram of your heart. That is a good test to run. So we start with just questions and asking those questions. Once we kind of bucket, okay, I think they're dealing with dysautonomia based on those questions, then we're going to send some education and we're going to learn what is dysautonomia and what does that mean for you? Which symptoms are you experiencing in this? Then we're going to track them. We track for a month, and then based off of the tracker and based off of your symptoms, we take a look and figure out, all right, what is our body telling us? And we do this by defining it in categories. So we have warning signs, which is something your body shows you before symptoms come on. Blood pooling is a perfect example of this. If you start noticing blood pooling, that means blood's not getting to our heart and our brain fast enough. We need to do something about that. The 3 things that we can do to increase our blood volume, which by the way, our adrenaline chemicals and our blood volume are opposite. So if your adrenaline's high, your blood volume's low. If your blood volume's high, our adrenaline's low. So when we get those adrenaline dumps, if we can increase our blood volume, usually our adrenaline, I'm messing up my hands, but usually our adrenaline's going to go down. And so 3 things that can make blood volume increase. Number 1 is salt and water and hydration. This is where electrolytes can come in, but reminder, we get electrolytes from food too. It doesn't need to be 17 LMNT packets a day. I'm not anti-LMNT. I take 1 every single day, but you do need to define for yourself how many you should be taking, how much salt you should be taking. And if your doctor just tells you have more salt, but does not define this for you, that is not a good doctor. The second is compression. The best is abdominal compression, but if that's really sensory overload, second best is, so the closer to your heart, the better. So your thighs is next best, socks are third best, but compression in general can be really helpful with this. And then the third is creating a nervous system safety. So belly breathing, doing tapping, doing something positive for your nervous system. So when you get one of those warning signs, all right, now you have 3 ways, 3 things that you can go try to bring that blood volume up, and let's see if our symptoms go down, and then we track that. So that's the warning side of things, and that hopefully is us being proactive so that we don't end up full-blown brain fog, full-blown feeling like we're going to pass out, so on and so forth. The other side of it is triggers, and triggers are harder because sometimes they're in our control, sometimes they're out of our control. And one of the most common triggers is our cycle, and that can be really challenging. And so when it comes to triggers, we want to create reactive strategies. And this is where that mindset shift of the what instead of why really needs to come into play, because you can play the why game all day long, but when the why is out of your control, you're not going to ask a snake why it bit you. If it bit you, you're going to go get the venom out. We have to take the same approach here. And then if we need to, because our brain works that way, we need to understand, we need that control piece. And I will say this straight up, if you are so focused on the why, that is your way of trying to control something. Maybe we need to work through that, but that's an aside. So for triggers, we're going to create reactive strategies. And so this could look like, all right, when I'm on my period, I know that these symptoms get higher. I'm going to plan a massage during that time period. I'm going to make my workouts a little bit differently. I'm going to add a relief routine in. I'm going to use more topicals. I'm going to use more Epsom salt baths. I'm going to do less on my schedule, so on and so forth. And we need to figure out what factors are going to create the best environment during those higher symptom time periods, if that's what we find. But everything we do is based off of data. It's not based off of vibes. It's not based off of your subjective thinking. And that's a big thing that we do, is we take subjective stuff, because all of this is subjective, and turn it into objectives. So the first thing we do is define what is a flare, what is a baseline, what is your middle, and we use that to create our patterns and our routines.
And I love that you don't just say don't do anything at all because you feel more in the middle or more flared. Can you talk a little bit about that? How like no movement is not the answer?
Yes, no movement is never the answer, but I actually am going to put this question on you because you just went on a vacation and you had multiple triggers present during that vacation. And what what was your first instinct and what changed now that you're 2 months into the program, and how did you handle that differently than you might have in the past?
I think before, the neck started going, and that's like usually a big warning sign for me that I'm gonna have a mast cell flare or the whole side of this whole left side chain flare. And it was like, oh shit, but no, I was like, I now know what my triggers were. And it's like, I can't carry everything on this left side. I was carrying a bunch of heavy stuff, but usually those things would last and spiral. But I was able to do some relief routines, wore my jelly band. I didn't stop my vacation. I didn't stop moving. I didn't spiral. I did, a couple things, and I woke up the next day and I had no pain. And for me I think it's like, especially if you've been dealing with these things for a long time, the more evidence your body has, that it's capable of A, stopping the flare, B, resuming quickly, to baseline, it provides so much safety in your system. And I think like one of the biggest things for me is I've always been like anti flare tracking. And I think it's like something I learned in nervous system programs was like, just don't think about it at all. You're drawing more attention to it if you're tracking it. And so I never did. And so I wasn't able to really identify a lot of triggers. And this has helped me so tremendously, because it's like I know to the day of my cycle which days are my harder days now. And it's not like I anticipate them or, get obsessive about them, but it's like I just know days 6 through 10 are a bad day for me or a bad time. And it's like I just readjust. I don't stop doing everything. I don't stop life, but maybe I'm not going to work out 3 days in a row, or I'm not going to, do things that prior to this program I would have kind of sabotaged myself. And I think that's something too. I think I answered your question. I think that the flare tracking has been really big for me. And just also seeing that it doesn't have to be this domino every time, has completely changed my life, honestly.
I love that. And everything you just said, proving to yourself that you can do hard things during a hard time
Yeah.
is the number one thing that's going to continue to allow you to do hard things over and over again. And when it comes to flares, flares are temporary and we need proof of that. And this is our objective way of seeing that visually, especially when you're in it. But
Yeah.
I love how you said like the flare tracking piece and the people saying like don't do that, that's obsessing.
Mhm.
I hear two things. Either I already know all of my triggers, I don't need to flare track, or no, I don't want to obsess over my symptoms. If we created a different narrative around our symptoms, we don't have to obsess over them, but we can still be aware of what's going on in our body and not make it a bad thing.
Yes. Yes. I think that's a huge piece of this, because like I said in the beginning, like learning about this, it's kind of like, oh no, this is a death sentence. This isn't something that I can like root cause my way out of and like completely heal. But, kind of accepting like I do have a more sensitive system. I can't go and do heated hit classes. That's just not my reality. And like that acceptance piece has been huge for me, and not like that, I don't need to root cause my way out of this and obsess over the why, like you're saying, because I think so much of the holistic health community really gets stuck on that root cause piece. And it was a toxin, and it was a this, and it was a that. And it's like, this is just my system, and I'm accepting it. And like, I'm finding ways to work through it so that it doesn't need to be this debilitated thing all the time.
Yes, my heart is beaming. It's beaming
No,
right
I mean,
now.
I truly just want to do this live because I'm so jazzed, and it's like it is like a strength building program. I don't think that you think of like an exercise program, especially in the mast cell population or this population in general, as something that's going to help you heal. And I think when people hear the word heal, they think that that means this person or myself is never allowed to or going to experience symptoms ever again. And there's this like huge shame piece and this I'm so wrong piece that I'm having symptoms or having a flare. And that's just so ridiculous. It's like, to be human is to experience symptoms, and it doesn't have to be this mental spiral.
You
And
pause.
we Okay, sorry, my computer keeps being like, do you trust this computer? Every time we experience something doesn't mean like this is bad or I'm bad. And I just think that mental shift is life changing.
I fully agree. And that is hands down the number one quality I see in my most successful clients. They accept, they don't shame, or if they do, they get help around and they work through that shame.
Yeah,
And they take action even if they don't know the why. And if you
yeah,
can get yourself to do those three things, that is healing to me. That is more healing than any gut protocol, any whatever mold, yada, yada, yada is ever going to do for you. Because guess what? You're going to see mold again in your lifetime. You're
yeah,
going to have
yeah.
things that are going to make you sick. You're
You're
going to
gonna
get
have stress. You're
sick.
gonna have traumatic
Because
things happen. Yeah, and
life isn't a life.
I want to kind of talk about that root cause piece a little bit more, and it's the mold and it's the this and it's the that. And when someone does live in like a body that is unstable, can we talk about how like that is a root cause? And
Yes.
maybe we don't need to be constantly chasing all these whys, because like that is the why. And also, why is it harder for someone in an unstable body to regulate their nervous system?
Yeah, and yeah, I will answer all of that.
Okay.
But another question that I want us to all kind of be asking ourselves when we're feeling that need for the why,
Yeah.
when you do get the why, but the why doesn't equate to a quick fix or a solution, why can we not accept that anymore? Because
Yeah.
when I tell people the why is that you have a connective tissue
Yeah.
disorder and that doesn't have a cure,
Yeah.
I can't accept that.
Yeah. I mean,
But
that's
if
why
I
I ignored all. I mean, if I saw any of that information come across my feed, I was like, nope, get out of my orbit?
Yep. And if we instead say the why is this mold toxin and I
Yeah.
have the exact protocol
Yep.
that's going to make it gone and it's going to cure you and you're never going to have a single problem again in your life. Here's $20,000. I'm going to give that to you. That's
Yeah.
a problem. It's
Yeah.
a huge, huge, huge problem. And I just need to say this. If somebody is selling you that, they are scamming you. We know for a fact that nothing with humans is that simple. There is no quick fixes
Yes.
in life. There is no generalized protocol. There is no A plus B equals C. I got made fun of for saying that the other day. So 1 + 1 = 2. There is
What was the
no
Kardashian one? Like ABC, or I forget. I'm not going to
yeah,
reference
yeah.
it.
I was
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm sorry. I'll use numbers, I guess. And so that it's just not how it works.
No.
And the root cause thing is something I talk about a lot in the musculoskeletal world, in the pain world, because pain is always 100% of the time multifactorial,
Yeah.
meaning there is never a root cause when it comes to pain. There
Yeah.
just isn't. Unless, no, not even. There really isn't. Like, there genuinely is not a
One.
single
Yeah.
one thing that causes chronic
Yeah.
pain. It's just not. And so it's easier to have that conversation on my side of the world. I really love Michelle Shapiro's take
Yeah.
on root cause and how she approaches this. I personally hate the word. I don't use it anymore.
Yeah.
I understand that in the functional medicine side of things, the registered dietitian side of things, it is a little bit different and that word can be used. But if it is being used as this is the cause of your problems, this is the solution, that is wrong. When you think of roots of a tree, there are multiple roots. There are multiple roots. Guess what? There are multiple root causes that are playing a role in your symptom profile.
Yeah.
Always. It is never
Always.
just one thing. And the nervous system is always a part of that. Do you know why? Because our brain controls everything. And that doesn't mean anything is in your head. But it does mean that we have to work on our brain. We just do. We don't ever get to get away from that. We have to constantly, constantly, constantly be working on our brain. And what's so cool about that is our brain can change. Neuroplasticity is so real. That means it could change for the positive too. I think we put a lot of pressure on our brain. And why did it get so negative when it came to mast cell, when it came
Yeah.
to COVID? And those things are real. But the truth is too, it can get better and our
Yeah.
brain can change positively too. And we have to believe that, and that might take proof. That might take a whole bunch of things. But that's a really important part of this too. And the last thing I'll say on this is that what you hit on, where like we want to have no pain. If you're bought into the like the normal amount of pain is zero thing,
Good
you're
luck.
setting yourself, you're setting
Yeah.
yourself up for failure. Everybody experiences pain. It's part of life.
Yeah.
We need to be more resilient instead of more regulated. We need to build resilience in our system, in our nervous system, in our body, in our ability to handle hard things, in our ability to handle pain. Now, that is not saying we ignore pain.
Yeah.
That is not what I'm saying at all. We just talked about how we're actually identifying our symptoms
Yeah.
way more now. But there is a way to not make those symptoms a bad thing and instead, okay, this is just information. I'm going to use that information to help me. It can
Yeah.
be that simple. Simple is
Yeah.
not easy though.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, because I'm sure some people watching, especially, because EDS is like such a huge spectrum, and there's people that are bedbound, and there's, I don't know. I have a huge athletic background. This is a strength building exercise program. I've been an athlete my whole life, and I think some people say, oh, it's easy for you that you got results that quickly or whatever. How do you work with such a large spectrum, and how do you work with people who maybe are at a very low functioning place?
Yeah, so we take people from bedbound to hiking again, running 10Ks. One of our bedbound clients just ran a 10K for the first time, all of the time. The number one thing is time and expectation setting. And that is the thing I see missing in our more severe bedbound clients is they don't give themselves enough time or they're comparing themselves to an old version of themselves and
Yeah.
they are not meeting their current self where they're at now.
Yeah.
And so they try to exercise, they try to do what they used to be able to do, and then they're in debilitating symptoms and now they can't get out of that hole. And so we start smaller when it comes to that client profile, and it's going to take longer. It's not going to be a 2 month. I wouldn't be having this conversation in this level of progress with somebody who came to me in a bedbound state. That's just 2 months is not enough time. It takes at least 6 months to really get out of that bedbound cycle. And when I say minimum 6 months, that
Yeah.
means minimum. Not everybody will even get there in 6 months. It takes a year sometimes. But there needs to also be objective progress measures that we're measuring to make sure we are headed in the right direction. Because that's another thing when you're bedbound is that you don't feel like you're making progress. And that
Yeah.
is a real feeling because it doesn't feel like it. We need to know if that's true or not. And that's again where flare tracking comes into play. But when it comes to our bedbound clients, very similarly to you, we figure out where's our current tolerable starting point. We create realistic expectations. We create realistic objective progress measures that we track. And if we're not headed in the right direction, we figure out what we need to change. And sometimes for this population, that does include bringing someone else into our care team
Yeah.
or referring out. Unfortunately, a lot of the time with our bedbound clients, there is some sort of we're not getting nutrients in enough, whether that's
Yeah.
from an abdominal compression syndrome or something out of our scope. If we can't fuel ourselves, if we can't meet our basic needs, exercise might not be safe and appropriate
Right.
yet. So we need to figure that piece out first, which is why we love referring to registered dietitians over here. But going in small steps, and there is always something that you can do movement wise.
Yeah.
Whether that is as simple as belly breathing, lying down, whether that is simple as some pelvic tucks in bed, seated calf raises, there is always something we can do to create blood flow and blood volume in our system and get our body moving. And we always are going to start there. What can we do before symptoms come on? And then we just gradually increase over time, making sure that there's no red flags coming into play as we go on. And then supporting the system to the best of our ability, our nervous system, like I said, meeting our basics. Do we have a sleep disorder? Are we not sleeping through the night? And if
Yeah.
yes, do we need to go get a sleep study and check that out? There's a lot of comorbidities that come into
Yeah.
play when you're bedbound, and having objectives and helping you create your care team can actually be even more beneficial than the strength piece for that specific population.
That makes sense. Can you talk about like how you do your assessments? Because it is all virtual, and also just how important it is to when you are trying to exercise again or work on pain, work on movement. I've just truly been shocked at, like, as an athlete my whole life and somebody who has a huge fitness background, like how terribly I was moving. Like Even like my
Thank you for
husband when
telling me
he
we're moving
watches.
terribly. We just
Okay,
have
sorry,
room
that's
for
bad language, but
improvement.
like my husband will be like, I don't even understand how to tell you because like my brain doesn't work like that. Like, can we talk about like proprioception too? And like, I didn't realize how hard of a time I have my brain telling my body to engage muscles and like how much my joints were doing all the work. And I was using larger muscles to move. And that's why I had pain in those spots. And I don't, the whole thing's been mind blowing, but how do you do your assessments? How do you through a camera see like, okay, you were like your neck is very hypermobile, your hips like, and no one's ever told me those things before. So how are these things missed too by PTs? And
The second part, I
sorry,
don't
that was
have
a
a good
million
answer.
questions.
I don't have a good answer for. I don't know because it's very obvious to me. So I know that's not a good answer for the second part, but the real answer is we're not taught it in school,
Yeah.
and that needs to change. But for the first part, and this is true for pretty much anything in the musculoskeletal realm, you can see things virtually, pretty much everything that you need without putting your hands on people. And I think people get very confused by that. What we know is that we don't have good interreliability when it comes to our palpation skills. What that means is like if I were to palpate you and tell you what is wrong, and another clinician came and palpated you and told you what's wrong, they're going to be not the same thing. And when it comes to movement, we can see if you are past end range or not. That is something we can visually see. It is very, very obvious. And so all we do is we go from head to toe and figure out what areas of our body are going past end range. And that is very, very simple. We just ask you to do every single range of motion from head to toe. And if they go past end range, we write those down. And then we do some specific things that are relative to your symptoms. So you're comfortable with me?
Oh yeah, whatever you want to say. Yeah.
So you had some SI joint, some hip specific symptoms going on. And so we went in and we said, okay, is this more adductor or abductor? Because usually when that profile and symptom profile is happening, one of those areas is going to be tighter, one of those is going to be weaker. And so we did some specific movements that would show us those things. And then based off of that, we create what we call test week. And test week is you actually on your own starting to do these movements, and we're just watching. As you notice, there's not a lot of cueing those first 2 weeks. That is on purpose because I want to see what does Jess naturally do. And based off of that, that's how I know where her interoception, her ability to know what her body is feeling, and her proprioception, which is where is her body in space, is at. And so using an RDL as an example, when Jess was doing an RDL, there was no control. It was just like whoop whoop. I'm going to use all my range of motion. There was no hip hinge available,
Oh, and that has been really hard, really, really
and
challenging.
you're crushing it. You're doing
Yeah.
so good. Like you need to give yourself some credit. You're absolutely crushing it. But we could see like you're just rushing through that motion, and that's the number one thing we see. And
Yeah.
when you have the range of motion, it's easy to cheat it. It's easy
Yeah.
to just use
What I
that
did my
range.
whole life. Yep.
Yep. And so first thing we usually do is just tell you to slow down
Yeah.
and teach you the awareness first. And I want you to kind of talk about that. I'm going to ask you a question in a second, but I do want to
Yeah.
answer this. No, we do not use
Oh,
SFMA. I am very anti SFMA. I am very anti any protocol. Why? Because humans should not be doing things based off a protocol. SFMA is a very structured, if this is off, you have to do this. It's very similar to that root cause
right.
theory, and it just doesn't work on everybody, and there's no solution for if it doesn't fit the green, red, yellow light, what's next. Instead, I
Yeah.
just look at you as a human, as a whole human. What areas are causing some issues? What areas are we not able to control? What areas are we really good at? And let's create our program around that and not made up rules. Anyway, sorry, I know
Yeah.
that was a lot.
No, no, I saw that question too. I was like, I don't know. You answer that.
And so, but I wanna put this question on you. When you first got into the program, and this is something a lot of our clients
I
they
was like,
they
I'm so
struggle
frustrated.
with. They're
Yeah.
so frustrated, rightfully so.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing that we worked on at first was, all right, let's just be aware of what's going on without changing anything. What did that do for you?
Huge because I think So just some context is that you really do start with like breathing, and I was like I want to like pick up a weight, and I was so frustrated with how slow it was, and yeah, I think that all of wait, what was the question? Like I didn't hear my kids.
At the beginning, when you were super
Yeah.
frustrated, and I told
Yes.
you we need to just be aware right
Yes.
now
Okay.
of
So
our
I
weight.
think what I got really overwhelmed with at the beginning was because I was really having a problem with breathing at that point because everything was up here. Was like, oh my God, all day I need to think because I had really bad rib flare. I did not know how to stack. And it was like I was trying to think about that all day long. And oh, am I stacking? Am I breathing? Am I and like then I got like air hunger episodes because I'm trying to breathe differently. And so I did have some flare-ups and those things, but you reminded me you don't need you were just trying to focus on those things as you're doing them. Just notice you're not fixing all this now. You have been moving this way for 44 years. Like, just be aware of it. And I think just like, um, having that permission to like we're not solving this today, it's just to notice really really helped me because I'm the type of person that wants to fix it now, and that's why I think I got really frustrated. I was like I want to be where I want to be, and I think like accepting like no, I need to work on how to breathe right now. It was really mentally challenging, I will be perfectly honest, and like yes, this has been relatively a short period of time, but it's work every day, and it has been very mentally challenging for me, especially because I have a background in exercise addiction and severe eating disorder, and I get a little triggered with some of those things when I'm in an exercise program or something because it triggers that really desire to want to push and speed up, and the needing to slow down to actually see results has like completely like talk about neuroplasticity has transformed my brain in like it's I have to accept that I am never again in my life unless I want to be in pain probably going to go bang out 50 thrusters again, and that's okay
Yep.
because I can do it slowly and controlled, and I'm doing squats right now. I did them today and I'm not in pain. And
Yes, you
it's
did.
wild. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, I was married before, and that was like when I was like 23, 24. I'm 44. So this is how long that I have had this like left-sided pain that would flare up every time. And it's like, I knew, and I just lived with it. I just accepted it. And I would go to all these different body workers and all these different providers for years and years and years. And to like be doing squats and not have that flare up, like I want to cry. I can't even believe it.
I love that for you. I love that for you. And that's the hardest part is accepting and
Yeah.
then be so one of the biggest things at the beginning is we are just creating awareness
Yeah.
without changing things, and that's really really hard, but we are being intentional with our exercise blocks, and that's something I would love to see more of is all right, in our everyday life, we're not going to change everything. These are habits that have been with us since we were 0 years old.
Yeah.
They're not going away right away. But during our exercises, that is where we can be intentional and really work on those neuroplasticity, those movement patterns that are important for you, and learning where your body is in space and using that time effectively. That I love how you haven't said anything about a complex exercise because we don't do complex exercises. You will never see any of our clients doing some crazy functional movement, yada, 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 because there's no need. We need to do the basics really, really well and then load our system up. And one of the most common frustrations, especially from past athletes and especially from women in general, is I feel like I'm not doing enough.
Yeah.
This
I said
doesn't
that
feel
too.
enough.
I was
Yep.
like, this is not enough. I was like,
Yep.
ugh.
Yep. Yep. And we have to define what enough is.
Yeah.
And we have to be okay with your enough right now is not
Yeah.
the same as enough from
Yeah.
Jess before kids or from Jess from a
Yes.
different time period. They're not the
Yes.
same person anymore.
No, and I
And that
think that that's a huge acceptance piece, especially as I'm going into, a new phase of hormonal life. I'm entering that era. And this is a sensitive time period for people with these types of, issues, whatever you want to call them, mast cell, hypermobility, all of these things, because hormones do have a huge influence in having had a past ED and massive bone loss. I was really in a place of like, what am I going to do if I can't exercise? But I think also like divorcing my mind from like exercising from a place of aesthetics to exercising in a place of like building bone safely, built, maybe gonna actually build muscle for the first time in my life. I was always like, why can I not build leg muscle? And I'm doing, it's because like I wasn't actually engaging them. But like switching the mind from like, this is how I am supporting my nervous system, mast cell activation syndrome, this is actually the route that's helping me do that, is very different from exercising from a place of body composition or aesthetics or weight loss.
And we get the aesthetic question all of the time, and my answer is always, we can have aesthetic goals, but if your
Yeah.
aesthetic goals interfere with your health goals,
Yes.
this program is not for you. We are going to
Yes.
be working on our health. If aesthetic comes along with that, or if you can be healthy and work on aesthetic at the same time, absolutely, we will support that. But the second your aesthetic goals interfere
Yeah.
with your health goals, this is not the place for you.
Yeah.
We are not ever going to support an aesthetic goal that is going to create some
Right.
sort of unhealthy habit. That's just not our philosophy, and we don't believe in that. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, many women, one of their root causes, if you will, or one of their parts of their story is that aesthetic piece interfering with
Yes.
their health. Yeah.
Yes. And I think that, you had that great post about like the cycles of overdoing it and getting stuck in that cycle. And then you can't work out at all. And then you're frustrated, you can't work out. And I think a lot of that overdoing it piece for myself always came from that part with inside of me that was trying to control. And, I need to work on those things in therapy as well. So I think it's like, this isn't the only thing I'm doing. Obviously there are, if that is something you are struggling with, and that within yourself also needs to heal.
100%. And when it comes to anything in the musculoskeletal realm, when it comes to building strength, it is always biopsychosocial. We can help with mindset shifts. We can help obviously
Yeah.
with the bio piece and the physiology side and learning how to gain strength, but we cannot help with the mental health side of things. And having a mental health professional on your care team, I believe, is imperative for everybody. I think everybody should be in therapy 100% of the time. Even if life is going well, I still think
Yes.
we should be
Oh
in
my God. I have
therapy.
therapy at 1:30 and I was like, I am like in a good place when I cancel. I'm like, no, this is what you always
Nope.
do. And I think
Yep.
that like, let's talk about, maybe we kind of end with that really good post that you had about the cycles of, oh, you feel good, you neglect the basics, you neglect your routines, you neglect the therapy and the things because you're like, I'm good. I'm in a good spot. And then you overdo it. I wanted to overdo it today. I was like, I feel good. I want to do more. And then I was like, don't do it.
Proud of you. I'm proud of you. I mean, yeah, that's it. Everything comes back to not living in the all or nothing, living in the
Yes.
gray. But when it comes to chronic illness, and rightfully so, you have so many bad days. When you finally have a good day, you want to
Yeah.
do all the things. And that also, there's a player in there deep inside of you that's like, oh, I can finally meet the expectations I've been putting on myself. I can finally do enough. And that is you just pushing through, and then 3 days later you're right back to where you were, or maybe even worse, because we're not pacing. And when you have a chronic illness, there is a level of acceptance that your
Yeah.
bucket is smaller, meaning your water can only be filled a certain amount. There are things we can do over time to make our bucket bigger, but you can't do that in a couple of days. And so when your bucket is this big, even on a good day, your bucket is still the same size, you just have less water in it. The bucket doesn't change size on a good day. We have less water in our bucket. We can do a little bit more. We can enjoy that, but we have to define what that means. And if you go and push through, water explodes, you're going to be right back where you are. Then you're going to be scared because every time I feel good, then I feel worse 3 days
Yes.
later. And then you don't put all those puzzle pieces together that it was, oh, because I overdid it and I did not
No,
pace.
you're like, what supplement did I take? What
Yes.
Oh, it was mold, you know.
Yep, 100%, 100. We blame everything except for our actions a lot of
Well,
the
that's where
time.
the flare
And I
tracker
say that
really
with
does
love.
come in hand. The flare tracker comes in handy with that too. Is
Yeah,
like, okay, it wasn't any of those things. This is, it becomes very obvious what some
yeah.
of those, and I think the overdoing it piece is huge, especially with mast cell activation syndrome. But can we talk a little bit about how I think this happens a lot, especially in this community, is uh, because you know that overdoing it or your capacity is lower, you kind of identify with that, you become kind of a victim to that, and then you make like, I can't do that, well, I can't do that, I can't do that, you know, kind of becomes your life.
Yeah, yeah. I have a very complicated relationship with identifying with chronic illness,
Yeah,
especially online,
yeah,
especially in support groups. I'm not a fan of support groups, of the Facebook support groups. I do find them to be sick Olympics. And I
yeah,
also have a big issue with when I personally, I don't know if you experience this, but if I personally post something awesome that I'm doing,
yeah,
I get told I'm ableist. I get told that wait till you're 40. I get told all these things. And it's like, all right, well, then I'm just never going to post anything again. And that's not the answer either. I know that.
yeah,
But there is a huge issue of showing hope and then someone seeing that hope as a bad thing for
as a
them,
threat, yeah,
as a threat. I don't know the answer to that, but what I do know is that that means you're stuck in a victim mindset. And I
yeah,
want to be very clear, you can be a victim and not have a victim mindset. They are
yeah,
not the same things. You are a victim to your condition. I will never, ever, ever doubt that. But you can still have a winner's mindset around that. And a winner's mindset means you are going to be the person that gets through that stuff.
yeah,
Whereas a victim mindset is you're never going to become that person because you're so stuck in why is this happening to me?
mm-hmm,
You're never going to get out of that hole if you stay there. And that doesn't mean that your feelings and your experience isn't valid. That doesn't mean what's happening to you is fair. None of that has to be true. But what I do know for certainty, if you stay in that victim mindset, you are never going to make progress. You are just
yeah,
not.
yeah.
So,
I think there's like a balance with that acceptance piece or like the surrender piece people often, sorry, take that, you know, obviously the black and white of like, oh, surrender means I do nothing. And it's like, no, it's just kind of accepting that, yeah, maybe I can't go, maybe I'm not the past version of myself, or I can't compare myself to someone who, you know, isn't living with some of these things, but I don't need to be a victim, you know?
exactly, exactly. And comparison, and I think that's where the identifying with your illness, and don't get me wrong, your illness is a part of your identity.
Yeah,
That is reality. You are not you without it. But if that's the only thing that you identify with, that's why we ask, one of the very first questions we ask is, what do you identify yourself as? And we want to see, what are the words you're using? Are you using mom? Are you using athlete? Are you using chronically ill? Are you using, what are we using? And we take that into consideration on how we're going to coach you. So every
yeah,
question we ask is intentional, believe it or not. But that is a big one, because the identity piece is going to really, really set you up for success or not.
yeah. Something I wanted to talk about, I was just talking to my husband this morning when we were working out, and I was like, you know, because I've done a lot. Like, he's always like, what is this, like, Pilates, blah, 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 for $39 a month or something? I'm like, I don't know. I don't remember signing up for that. You know, like, what is this somatic gym? I'm like, I don't know. I did that twice. You know, I've signed up for so many things over the years, and they were like $29 a month. And it is one of those things that I was just like, like, I forget about. I did it twice and whatever. And I actually said to him, like, I know people will have this question. I hope you don't mind me sharing what the price of your program is. You know,
Absolutely.
it's
Absolutely.
$1,500 for 3 months. And
Yep.
that might sound like a lot,
Mhm.
but I was like, this is something, because I paid that price, that I'm actually like following through with every single day, where normally I don't, because it's like I forget that I paid for that. And you know, that's probably the person who banks on people forgetting that they, you know, are paying that $29 every month. But I think that, yeah, talk a little bit about that, and like your, like how you structure your program, why it's 3 months, why it's, you know, if people, you know, maybe think it's too expensive or,
Yeah. And trust me, I'm a patient too. I
yeah,
understand how expensive the world is. So we start all of our programs at 3 months. I don't believe change can be made in anything less than three
no,
months. And we start everybody on the program Jess is on, which is our foundations program. And within the foundations program, you are getting weekly touch points and daily touch points. And you are working through not just the physical stuff, not just getting stronger and understanding where your body is in space and what that means for you and the flare tracking and all of that, but also the mindset shifts needed to accept this condition and accept what that means for you. And that takes a lot of touch points, a lot of support, a lot of guidance, and it takes a lot of time on our end. And it's not something that you can get from going to a weekly exercise class or a weekly chiro appointment or a weekly nervous system somatic video. When you are starting this journey, you need more than that.
Yeah.
You do. And if you have found yourself in that loop of trying things over and over again and nothing sticking, maybe it's because we are not getting enough one-on-one support.
Yeah.
These conditions require one-on-one support. These generalized programs are great if you have the foundation, but if you don't, you're gonna end up
Yeah. Like when I don't even know how to move properly and I'm doing everything that's on a video improperly, causing me to be in more pain, that's not a solution. But I love that so you video yourself if you want or not, I guess at first you have to, and then
you have to at
get
first. You have
and
to.
get yes you do, and then give feedback on the video, which is so incredibly helpful because then I'm like, oh my God, I've rounded my back that whole time or whatever it is. And so I just want to point that out. Like, it is not just this thing that it's like, oh, follow the video. Like, you are showed videos, but then you're giving feedback on your own movement.
And that's another really big piece is I'm sure you can attest to this, and some people question this at the beginning. Our videos on purpose do not cue you a lot because
No.
we want to really see
Yeah.
what does your body do, and the cueing comes from the feedback that we're giving you. So the weekly feedback video is based off of Jess's actual exercises, not based off of generalized cues that I could give you in an extra. I could do that. I could give you exercise cues prior and then you can try it and it might go a little bit better, but it's not going to create those neural
It's
pathways in the
neural
same
pathway
way
shift.
of
Yeah.
you feeling for that first time, that aha moment of, oh, I felt what it felt like when I was doing it this way. I got individual feedback. Now I'm doing it in a different
I'm
way.
like,
I can feel
yeah,
different.
like a freaking tricep kickback. I'm like, shit, I did that wrong forever and ever and ever. And I'm like, this is so hard. I threw the towel. I was like, because it's hard when you are having to relearn very, very basic movements in a different way.
Yep.
But I appreciate that. And also just like, you can message daily. Well, you're supposed to message daily. I'm bad about that. And I think that people would love to be able to message someone and be like, hey, I'm feeling this or that. And I'm like, I don't know how you keep up with that. But for me, that's worth knowing that it's there, and that's why it is, but
Yep.
$500 a month,
Yep. And so that's the first 3 months, and that's our foundations program. Depending on where you are in the spectrum, you might, like we said, those bedbound clients, they're going to need foundations for more than 3 months.
Yeah.
But someone like Jess needs foundations to build that foundation. And then I know she's going to be more than ready to move on to our less handholdy and less expensive programs. And we have it built in a tiered system. So it goes from foundations to our momentum program, which again is a 3 month commitment. Because again, we don't believe change can be made in anything less than 3 months. And that one is a little bit less hands-on support. You're going to start doing flare tracking on your own without us interpreting it for you, but you're still going to get that exercise feedback, so on and so forth. And then we do have a just monthly subscription. It's called our Goal Getter program. You have to go through the first 2 programs to get to our Goal Getter program, and that one is where our girls are just rocking it. They are just getting really, really strong. They're working on specific goals, whether that's a 10K, whether that's a deadlift their body weight for the first time, so on and so forth. And that's my hope for all of our clients, is that they're able to get to that program. And then I personally will have a coach my entire life because
I said that this morning too.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm just gonna need it. And I just like that because I've even thought about like, oh, at 3 months, like I'm not gonna be ready to work out without support.
Yeah, and you might never be, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Like personally, I have accepted I am going to have my coach's name's Jared. I'm gonna have Jared my entire life. I wouldn't have it any other way. One, because I don't want to have to make my own workouts. I
No.
do that
Yeah.
for a living and I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And two, when life is lifing and when things happen, you cannot take an objective lens on yourself and know what you need to mitigate, and
No.
you need support, especially women. Like, we need support, and so you have a great support system at home. Unfortunately,
Mhm.
that is not the reality
Yeah.
for many, many, many people,
Yeah.
and that is hands down the number one success metric is your support system. And if you know you don't have a good support system at home, please find a way to outsource support. It is so, so important.
hmm And I just think the way that you're so empowering, especially in like the EDS world versus like you said, like those Facebook groups, which I feel like just have so much darkness. Um, if you don't have that support system at home, that could literally change your life.
Yep, I agree. I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
All right. Any
Yeah,
last?
I feel like we could just keep going and
I
going.
know we
So
could
many of the
keep going
questions
forever.
were based on children, and I know that you do not work with children. And so, do you have any resources for people with children? I know for myself, they say, how do you support children with this? My children are both hypermobile. I definitely saw some more symptoms pop up when Hudson, my son, went through like a infection after infection after infection. Same with my daughter. So that is just, kind of the reality. And she's like very, very, very tight, and he's very, very, very loose. So they're very different. But I don't make it a thing, for them. But I think for us, like step one right now is like going through their airway journey, because that is a huge piece of, the symptom picture is a high narrow palate, mouth breathing, and, all of that, the tonsils and blah, blah, blah. And that piece I'm hoping will set them up, so well for their future, because they will not have so much of the TMJ and airway stuff going on too.
Yeah. So my biggest three things. The biggest thing that my mom did for me when I was a kid was get me the support without creating a narrative around it.
Yeah.
My occupational therapist was called my handwriting tutor. My physical therapist was me practicing to be better at my sport. We didn't label anything for me until I was in high school, because when you start labeling things, your child's going to start feeling different, and especially in the world now, they can go Google it, and it
Yeah.
is scary out there on Google. That's the last thing I would, if I had kids, that's the last thing I
Yeah.
would want them to see is what is on the internet about these conditions. And so when you are getting them that support, finding creative ways to create a narrative around, this is just going to make you better. This is just to help you out. Not that there's anything wrong with you, not
Yeah.
that there's anything we're fixing. I think that's really, really important. And then second, there's this question about like, do I need to get my kid diagnosed? You
Yeah.
cannot have a diagnosis with this condition until you're 12. There's reasons for that. There's valid reasons for that. And so the answer is no, you can't until they're 12. That doesn't mean you can't support them,
Yeah.
but we cannot be putting labels on kids. It's a very well studied thing.
Yeah.
And it's really, really important that you don't project your own fears onto your children. Third, finding an empowering movement specialist. My favorites are Hannah Sadowski. She's based out of Miami, but she also does virtual. She is hands down the most empowering physical therapist for bendy humans, especially if they're gymnasts, cheerleaders, dancers. 12 out of 10 recommend. The reason I personally don't work with kids is because how our program works, it is all virtual,
Mhm.
and I have not been able to, it's also asynchronous. So it's not, I just have not been able to get kids bought in, whereas Hannah does things synchronous through Zoom. So that's the biggest difference. And then another great resource is Megan Barker. She's Hypermobility Health Coach on Instagram. She's actually creating a kids program as we
Oh,
speak.
wow.
She's launching it in August. She will be doing a lot of stuff on my page when she does launch that, but she's a great resource for that even now until she's ready to launch that program. So those would be my two recommendations for kids, along with being really careful with the narratives and
Yeah.
creating support. Anyways, doing all the things, like you just said, getting the myofunctional therapy stuff,
Yep.
getting them in occupational therapy if that's what they need, but just being really careful
Yeah.
with the